Arjan, thank you so much for doing this. Just give me an introduction to who you are, your role and your involvement with the humanitarian crisis in Sudan.
I'm the IRC Crisis Lead. I'm responsible for cross-border programming in Sudan, and notably in Darfur. Sudan has been kind of the place where I've spent much of my humanitarian career over the past 30 years.
Assuming that people may have seen headlines and maybe have scanned stuff, but assuming a very sort of basic level of knowledge, can you give us quick context to the overall countrywide humanitarian crisis in Sudan right now before we move on to the more specific stuff?
Yeah, so Sudan has been at war with itself already, since its independence, right? I mean, since 1956. And it comes from an over-investment in the center at the expense of the periphery, and a number of ethnic groups that basically have been the elite in the country and that have ignored and marginalized the periphery. That has led to the breakup of the country into South Sudan and Sudan. That has also contributed towards the war that we're now seeing in Darfur, which started already, over 20 years ago, when the regime under Bashir tried to marginalize the African populations, particularly there. You had the Janjaweed that were composed of Arab tribes attacking the African tribes in Darfur. This war has festered. It has restarted in its current form since April of 2023. The Janjaweed now being the RSF, and a very, very powerful militia that basically started to fight against their former masters, the Sudanese armed forces. This conflict has basically split the country into two. They're not the only parties to the conflict, but they're the main parties to the conflict at the moment. That has led to a massive crisis across Sudan, with 30 million people affected, with 14 million people displaced. If you're looking at a humanitarian crisis in terms of sheer numbers, and Sudan is, hits all the records. So, and there's no real end in sight in terms of a negotiated solution. These two parties to the conflict are both military leaders first and foremost, and they're not political leaders interested in putting the country together. Outside powers are massively involved around Sudan, all the neighbors, but also sponsors like Saudi Arabia and Turkey and Russia and UAE. All have their fingers in the pie. And so it's very, very difficult, particularly now with the US no longer being the power that it once was, and with the influence that it once had, and being distracted and looking elsewhere. So there's no real solution in sight.
Can you give us a bit of context to where Fasher is? How many civilians are there? Proximity to Tawila and what that is? And what's changed in the last week?
Yeah, so Fasher is the capital of North Darfur. It was the only capital in the Darfur states that was still controlled by the Sudanese armed forces. It has been surrounded and besieged by RSF. That siege has really been tightened since the beginning of the year, with no humanitarian aid going in. And so we're talking about a middle-age type siege of a city which was nearly complete with, at that time, last year there were about 800,000 people living in Fasher still. And so they didn't have access to food, no humanitarian assistance. Water systems had been broken down. There were drones. Drones are everywhere, circling the city, shooting at hospitals, but also at individuals. There were artillery bombardments, aerial bombardments, fighting in the streets. And so really a hellscape, hell on earth for the citizens of Fasher, who have been trying to leave and have left in significant numbers during that siege. But even that fleeing from the city was very, very difficult, very dangerous, and very often they had to pay in order to be able to get to safety. And that has even gotten worse over the past week, because the Sudanese armed forces withdrew from the town. They left it to RSF. RSF has come in, and I don't know whether your viewers have or will see, I don't recommend it, but the videos that have been circulating, but RSF soldiers themselves basically showing how they were executing, killing, chasing women for rape, calling racist slurs whilst they were saying, let's kill all these people. And so, horrible, basically videos that made my colleagues in Tawila burst out with tears. And we are hearing stories of people who come from Fasher who basically say the similar things. People are being detained, held hostage, they have to pay for their freedom, they're being executed if they can't pay.
I saw David Miliband on MSNBC. He was talking about, IRC have warned that when Fasher fell, the danger was of mass killing. He said there's very few people getting out of Fasher That tells us people are being penned in. Stories of escape suggest mass killings. Yale Humanitarian Lab say the satellite imagery shows clusters of bodies, bloodstained ground consistent with people killed while trying to flee. So there's a correct me if I'm wrong on the numbers. IRC have said that there's 5,000 people arrived in Tawila as 245,000 people unaccounted for. What do we know about those 245,000 people? What's likely to have happened or is happening?
Yeah, it's the biggest question that we're facing right now. So we're working in Tawila, which is about 60, 70 kilometers away from Fasher. It is an area that is controlled by a different armed group, which has maintained neutrality. And so it's a safe place for people to go to. It's also the place where most of the humanitarian assistance is provided at the moment. And so there's in terms of safety and humanitarian assistance, if you're fleeing Al-Fasher and you're looking for a safe place to go where there's at least a modicum of assistance, then you would go to Tawila. But the reality is we've seen only 5,000 people arriving. The estimate, and so I'm saying an estimate because it's very hard to be certain, the estimate of the number of people living in Al-Fasher by the time it fell to RSF was about 250,000. And so the big question right now is what is happening to the people of Al-Fasher? Where are they and how are they and why are they unable to come to safety? This coupled with all the information we're seeing on the social media, all the horrible stories that we're hearing, the videos that we've been seeing, it makes us just incredibly disturbed and concerned for their fate. Now, what can happen? They can be kept from going to safe locations. They can be kept in the city. They can be screened for affiliation with SAF, particularly the young men. We are hearing stories about people being kept hostage in order for them to be able to contact their family, to pay for their freedom. And so none of the things that we're hearing about is any good. And all of it makes us, and particularly my Sudanese colleagues, incredibly concerned for what is happening. It's just a massive question mark. And so, yeah, we're all asking, where are the people of Al-Fasher? We don't know.
Can you just sort of explain to people why getting verified information is so difficult?
The reason why it's so difficult for us to be able to obtain any information is that there's a complete communication blackout. And so we haven't heard anything anymore after those horrible videos were shared online from anyone that is in the city. There's mutual aid groups, community groups that basically provide support, and they were still providing support in Al-Fasher during the siege, and we were supporting them in order to be able to do so. And one of them basically, we had a contact just after Al-Fasher fell, and they said death is coming. And so we haven't heard from them since either. And we can't get there because at the moment the security situation was very unclear. We're hoping to get there at some point in the near future. But until such time that we do, we just have to go on what we've seen on social media and what we're hearing from people who are arriving. But that's basically it.
What should humanitarian organizations be doing right now? Like, you talked about various sort of nation states as well. Like, what are the diplomatic levers that, say, the UK government could be using right now?
The UK is pen holder in the UN Security Council, and so they can actually, on Sudan, and so they can actually take initiatives in terms of briefings. I think the emergency UN Security Council meeting earlier in the week was also partially their initiative, so they can play that role in order to be able to focus the UN Security Council on the situation in Sudan. They evidently can also exercise influence and leverage over some of the sponsors to the conflict, particularly the UAE. Now, they have been reticent and reluctant to be able to do so already for some time, and don't know whether that will continue to be the case. But at the end of the day, if you want to exercise pressure on RSF, you have to go through their sponsors. And so that's something that the UK government can do. And the UK government has made available funding and additional funding, I think, over the last couple of days, which is very, very useful because the response is underfunded. And, we're meeting only 50% of the basic needs of the people who were already in Tawila before Al-Fasher fell to RSF. And finally, just continuously expressing concern and focusing on Sudan, which has not been something that most member states or most European states or other states have been doing, is in itself very, very important in order to keep the spotlight on and to generate the political pressure and leverage that is necessary.
What is sort of your message to the international humanitarian community?
all of us, we have to do more. We have to do better for the people of Sudan. The UN in particular is very important to the response in Darfur. They are constrained to work here in Darfur. They need to fight those constraints as they're doing in order to be able to be more present in Darfur and to work alongside the NGOs who are already there. And then, all the NGOs that are present in Darfur and in North Darfur in particular, they need to be more supported by more funding from different states and from the general public in order to be able to continue their work. We have, I think, finally in Sudan, we have done a lot. All the organizations here, we've done a lot in order to be able to support Sudanese organizations, particularly the Sudanese community organizations. They have been incredibly important and incredibly brave in the work that they do in Fasher and previously in Khartoum. And that sort of support needs to continue, particularly now as these community groups are themselves at risk because of the way the conflict is evolving in Sudan. So that's something that we all need to continue and all need to do better at in order to be able to support the people of Sudan too.
Thank you, Arjan.